General Korgith stood at the edge of the observation deck, arms crossed over his broad chest, watching the latest intelligence feeds on the humans. The holographic display flickered in shades of blue and red, showing grainy footage of Earth's military forces. Columns of soldiers, mechanized armor, sleek fighter jets cutting through the sky. Primitive. Inefficient. Weak. A scoff rumbled from his throat, deep and guttural. These creatures call themselves warriors? His mandibles clicked in amusement. They hide behind machines, behind strategy. If they were truly strong, they would face battle with their own flesh, their own might. The war council gathered around him remained silent, their orange-hued eyes shifting in uncertainty. Korgith knew what they feared to say. He had heard the whispers. Some of the commanders had begun to question the invasion of Earth. Reports from scouting units spoke of human unpredictability, their refusal to surrender even in hopeless battles. But Korgith dismissed these as irrelevant details. All lesser species clung desperately to survival. It did not make them exceptional. He turned sharply, his heavy boots striking against the metallic floor. The council has grown soft, he growled. You fear these frail beings? A young officer, his posture rigid with discipline, stepped forward. Not fear, General, but caution. The humans? Our prey, Korgith interrupted, stepping toward the officer until he loomed over him. And we are hunters. The officer dipped his head in deference, retreating without another word. Korgith let his gaze sweep over the others, challenging any to speak further. None did. His second-in-command, Warbringer Julek, cleared his throat. Then you will not reconsider the challenge, General? Korgith's mandibles twitched with irritation. No, I will not. He turned his back to the War Council once more, looking out into the void of space where the great warships of the Kra'thel Dominion floated in silent menace. We will not waste fleets and warriors on this infestation. I will break their spirit in one battle. His voice carried the weight of finality. I will fight their best. And when their strongest warrior falls, they will know resistance is futile. Julek remained still for a long moment before nodding. Very well. The humans have selected their champion. Korgith grinned, showing serrated teeth. Good. Let them believe in their false hope a little longer. The captured human officer sat shackled in the cold cell, his uniform dirted from his last encounter with Kra'thel interrogators. Colonel Davis had seen war before, but nothing like this. The Kra'thel were stronger, faster. Some stood over 8 feet tall, their muscle density far beyond human capability. The sheer arrogance of their warlords, however, was their greatest weakness. The cell door hissed open and Korgith stepped inside, ducking under the frame. The air grew thick with the scent of iron and ozone, the lingering presence of a warrior who had seen 100 battlefields. Davis exhaled slowly, not bothering to stand. He knew posturing wouldn't impress the alien general. Here to gloat, I assume? Korgith chuckled. No, human. I have already won. Your people simply do not realize it yet. Davis tilted his head, observing the towering figure. You're making a mistake, General. Oh. Korgith crouched, bringing his monstrous face closer. Explain. You think this fight is going to prove something? That if you kill one man, our species will kneel? Davis let out a dry laugh. That's not how humans work. Korgith studied him for a moment before shaking his head. I have faced many species, human. All believe they are different. All fall the same. Davis met his gaze without flinching. Then you've never fought one of us before. The general considered the words, intrigued by the unwavering conviction in the human's voice. Finally he stood, turning to leave. We shall see. Korgith strode through the warship's grand hallways, his mind already on the coming battle. A duel against Earth's finest warrior. The terms had been negotiated, no energy weapons, no technological interference. A fight of skill, of strength. He relished the thought. The human champion's name had been sent to him. Jack Reynolds, a decorated warrior of their Navy SEALs. Korgith barely skimmed the records. It did not matter. Whatever training this man had undergone would crumble under the sheer force of a Kra'thel warlord. Julek approached as Korgith neared the command chamber. The human arrives soon. Korgith nodded. Ensure the arena is ready. Julek hesitated, then spoke carefully. General, the human is different. Korgith's mandibles twitched. All species think they are. No, Julek insisted. I mean, he does not stand like prey. The word stopped Korgith in his tracks. He turned his head slightly. Elaborate. Julek exhaled. When the prisoners were brought in, most were broken, fear in their eyes, shoulders sagging. This one? He looked at us like we were obstacles. Julek's voice lowered. Like we were problems to be solved. Korgith turned fully, expression darkening. And that unsettles you? Julek hesitated. It concerns me. The general laughed. A deep, bellowing sound that echoed through the halls. You have been fighting weaklings for too long, Warbringer. You have forgotten what true warriors look like. Julek remained silent, but Korgith could see the doubt lingering in his eyes. It did not matter. The duel was set. The human would fight. And he would die. Korgith stepped past his second-in-command, his mind already picturing the moment of victory. A fallen human warrior, Earth's hope crushed. It would be a glorious day. Jack Reynolds sat on the edge of the transport bay, rolling his shoulders as the ship rattled through Kra'thel space. He had been in plenty of combat zones before. Jungles thick with humidity, deserts where the heat could cook a man alive, frozen wastelands where every breath burned in his lungs. But this was new. Alien steel surrounded him, humming with unfamiliar energy. His hands, rough with calluses from years of wielding knives and rifles, rested calmly on his thighs. He could feel the eyes of the guards on him, hulking, armored Kra'thel warriors standing rigid, their clawed fingers gripping their weapons. They were trying to intimidate him. It wasn't working. Reynolds glanced at his reflection in the smooth metal wall. His face was lean, sharp, lined with experience. His short-cropped hair had begun to gray at the edges, but his blue eyes remained cold, calculating. He wasn't the biggest man nor the strongest, but that had never mattered. What mattered was what lay beneath the surface, the ability to endure, to think 3 moves ahead, to win. A Kra'thel officer stepped forward, his armored boots clanking against the floor. We have arrived. His voice was deep, guttural, thick with disdain. Prepare yourself, human. Reynolds smiled slightly and stood. I've been prepared since the day I was born. The officer scowled and turned sharply, leading him down the corridor. The warship was massive, its design brutal and efficient. The walls were marked with carvings of past battles, depicting Kra'thel warriors standing over the corpses of conquered foes. A nice touch, Reynolds thought. It meant they liked to live in the past. The path led to a wide platform where a transport pod waited. The Kra'thel officer gestured toward it. Reynolds stepped inside without hesitation. The doors hissed shut. A moment later, the floor trembled and the pod shot downward. He exhaled slowly, rolling his neck. Soon he would stand in the arena, face to face with the alien general. He had read the briefings, studied the recordings, learned everything there was to know about Korgith. The Kra'thel was an apex predator, standing nearly 8 feet tall, layered in thick muscle and armored plating. He had fought countless duels, slaughtering every opponent who stood against him. And now Korgith expected Reynolds to be another name on that list. The pod jolted to a stop. The doors slid open, revealing the arena. A massive, circular coliseum stretched out before him, its walls lined with thousands of Kra'thel spectators. The air pulsed with their anticipation, a low, rumbling growl of excitement sweeping through the stands. The ground beneath him was hard, compacted stone, darkened with the stains of past battles. Across the arena, the towering figure of General Korgith stood waiting. He was a monstrous sight, his massive frame covered in ornate battle armor, his warblade gleaming under the alien sunlight. His mandibles clicked together in amusement as he watched Reynolds step forward. So this is humanity's finest? Korgith's voice carried across the arena, amplified by unseen technology. I expected more. Reynolds smirked. That's the problem with expectations. He rolled his shoulders, stretching his arms. They rarely match reality. Korgith chuckled. You will die quickly, human. Reynolds let out a slow breath. His pulse was steady. His mind was clear. He had fought men who thought they were invincible before. The trick wasn't to overpower them. It was to outthink them. He settled into a loose stance, hands at his sides, feet positioned just right. The crowd roared in anticipation. Then the signal sounded. Korgith moved first, charging with terrifying speed, his warblade cutting through the air. Reynolds had already calculated his path. At the last second he sidestepped, the blade missing him by inches. He felt the rush of air as it passed, the sheer force of it enough to sever limbs. The audience gasped. Korgith skidded to a halt, his eyes narrowing. He hadn't expected that. Reynolds smiled. This was going to be fun. Korgith turned slowly, the edge of his warblade still humming from the force of his swing. His mandibles clicked in amusement, but his eyes, sharp and calculating, studied Reynolds with new interest. The human had moved with precision, not out of fear, but with the ease of a predator avoiding a careless strike. Reynolds flexed his fingers, rolling his shoulders as if shaking off a warm-up. His boots scuffed lightly against the stone as he adjusted his footing. He could feel the weight of thousands of Kra'thel eyes on him, watching, waiting for their warlord to cleave him in two. He ignored them. The only thing that mattered was the opponent in front of him. Kra'thel lunged again, closing the distance with terrifying speed. This time Reynolds ducked low, pivoting on his back foot as the warblade whistled over his head. Before the general could recover, Reynolds drove his elbow into the alien's exposed side. It was like hitting a steel beam, but the force of impact made Kra'thel grunt, his massive body shifting slightly. The crowd hissed in surprise. No one touched the general. Kra'thel turned, faster than something his size should be able to, and lashed out with a brutal backhand. Reynolds barely managed to twist away, but even as he moved, the edge of the blow clipped his shoulder. Pain exploded down his arm as he stumbled back, but he stayed upright. A lesser man would have crumpled. Kra'thel tilted his head. Not bad, human. Reynolds rolled his arm, testing the damage. Bruised but functional. He let out a slow breath, his heartbeat steady. You hit like a truck, he admitted. But a slow one. The general grinned, baring serrated teeth. Arrogance will not save you. Reynolds smirked. Neither will brute force. Kra'thel attacked again, this time with more control, adapting. He feinted left, then swept his blade in a rising arc from below. Reynolds saw the shift in weight, the tensing of muscle before the move, and sidestepped at the last moment. The warblade carved a deep gouge in the arena floor where he had been standing a second earlier. The human moved before Kra'thel could recover. He darted in close, inside the alien's reach, and drove his knife up toward the joint in the general's armor. Kra'thel twisted, taking the strike on a plated forearm, and retaliated with a knee meant to crush ribs. Reynolds barely managed to deflect it with his forearm, but the force sent him skidding back. He winced as he straightened. The impact had been brutal, but he was still standing. The crowd's roaring had changed. It was no longer a deafening wall of excitement but something else. Uncertainty. Kra'thel noticed too. His eyes narrowed. Reynolds lifted his knife and tapped the flat of the blade against his palm. You starting to get it? The general exhaled slowly. You fight differently than the others. I fight to win, Reynolds said simply. Kra'thel circled him now, slower, more methodical. His arrogance had dulled, replaced by focus. He was starting to respect the fight. Good. Reynolds let his breathing slow, measuring his opponent. Kra'thel had the advantage in size, strength, and durability. But none of that mattered if he couldn't land a decisive hit. The warlord was skilled, but he had spent his life fighting warriors who relied on strength alone. Honor, tradition, brute force, that was the Kra'thel way. Reynolds had spent his life breaking people who thought that way. Kra'thel moved first again, but this time his strikes came with calculated precision. He wasn't just swinging, he was setting up a kill. The warblade became a blur, slashing high, feinting low, cutting off Reynolds' escape angles. The speed was relentless. Reynolds blocked, evaded, countered when he could. He could feel his muscles starting to burn, his body wearing down. He wouldn't last in a prolonged fight. He needed an opening. Kra'thel swung for his ribs. Reynolds twisted, letting the blade pass within an inch of his side, then lunged forward. He slammed his fist into the general's jaw, driving every ounce of weight he had into the blow. Kra'thel staggered. Just a step. Just enough. Reynolds spun behind him, slamming his knife into the gap between armor plates at the base of the warlord's skull. Silence. Kra'thel's body went rigid. His warblade slipped from his fingers, clattering against the stone. Reynolds yanked the knife free and stepped back. The general swayed once. Then his massive form collapsed to his knees. The arena was deathly quiet. The thousands of Kra'thel who had come to witness an execution now watched in stunned disbelief. Their greatest warrior had fallen, not to an alien giant, not to another beast of war, but to a human. Kra'thel exhaled slowly, his voice a rasping whisper. You are not weak. Reynolds wiped the blood from his knife. I know. The general's body slumped forward. He was dead before he hit the ground. The silence in the arena stretched, heavy and unnatural, pressing against Reynolds like the weight of a battlefield just before the first shot. Thousands of Kra'thel warriors stood frozen in the stands, their reptilian faces unreadable, their war cries swallowed by disbelief. Kra'thel, the undefeated warlord, lay motionless at Reynolds' feet, his lifeless eyes staring at nothing. Reynolds exhaled slowly, the metallic tang of alien blood thick in the air. His muscles burned, his breath came in measured gulps, but he remained standing. He had fought countless times before, in deserts and jungles, in places where death whispered from every shadow. But this was different. This wasn't just a fight. This was a message. He lifted his gaze to the assembled warriors, the ones who had been so sure, so certain, that their general would crush him in seconds. But now their greatest had fallen. The truth hung in the air, undeniable. A human had bested a Kra'thel in their own arena, on their own terms. Then movement. A Kra'thel officer stepped forward, his armor gleaming under the alien sunlight. Jack. He had watched the fight from the highest seat, his expression unreadable even now. His heavy boots echoed as he descended into the arena, eyes fixed on Reynolds. The tension crackled like a live wire. The warriors in the stands leaned forward, waiting, unsure whether to avenge their fallen leader or accept the impossible. Jack stopped just a few feet from Reynolds, looking down at Kra'thel's body. His nostrils flared slightly, but his expression remained composed. Slowly he lifted his gaze. "You were not supposed to win," he said, his voice calm, almost distant. Reynolds wiped his knife clean on his sleeve. "I get that a lot." Jack studied him, his orange-hued eyes narrowing slightly. "You are not stronger than him. Not faster. Not armored." Reynolds shrugged. "Nope. And yet he is dead. You are not. That's how fights work." A flicker of something passed through Jack's expression. Not anger. Not hatred. Something else. Finally he nodded once, a slow, deliberate motion. Then, before the stunned eyes of every Kra'thel in the Colosseum, he bent his knee and placed one massive fist over his chest in a warrior's salute. A single motion. A single gesture. But it was everything. The arena erupted in a low, rumbling growl, not of anger but of acknowledgement. Of understanding. The warriors who had come to witness their general's victory were now forced to see the truth. Brute strength had failed. Tradition had failed. The old ways had failed. One by one, more warriors followed Jack's lead, lowering themselves in silent respect. Reynolds stood still, watching, feeling the gravity of the moment settle into his bones. He had won battles before, but this was something else entirely. He had not just defeated Kra'thel. He had rewritten the rules of war. Jack rose to his full height, his voice carrying over the crowd. "The Dominion will not forget this day." Reynolds met his gaze. "Neither will humanity." A long pause. Then Jack stepped aside, gesturing toward the exit. Reynolds nodded once, sliding his knife back into its sheath. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving behind a battlefield that would never be the same.